In this video, we'll be looking at second grade geometry TEKS, 2.8a, 2.8b, 2.8c, 2.8d, and 2.8e. We're going to first of all just look at the verbs that the students will be working on when they are working through geometry. Students will need to create, which means they have to make that item. They will need to classify and sort two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes. So they're naming them based on their attributes, and then they're putting them into categories based on those attributes. They need to compose. When they compose, they're creating a shape from other shapes, and then they have to decompose, and they're breaking apart those shapes into other shapes. So we're going to start out with the first TEK, with the students having to work with two-dimensional shapes. We'll focus all this beginning part on two-dimensional, and the end of the video will be on three-dimensional shapes. So students start out by having to create two-dimensional shapes. So basically with a given attribute. So we're not asking students, can you create a triangle? We're asking the students, can you create a three-sided figure? So we're going to ask the students to do that first. They can use popsicle sticks. We can give them toothpicks. These are counting sticks that we can use, and they can create their shape using those here. You can use geoboards to create a shape. You can ask the students, can you create a four-sided figure? And they could make a rectangle. They could make a trapezoid, but as long as it has four sides or it has four vertices, and we're using those terms with the students for them to then create 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We could ask them to create a six-sided shape, and these shapes do not have to be regular shapes. They can be irregular shapes. We'll see if we've created a six-sided figure here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've created a five-sided figure just real quickly. But we're going to give them attributes, they create the shape. If we've talked about or we've introduced the terms, then the students can name those terms as well. But right now it's just about creating based on us giving them attributes. Students could use pipe cleaners. You can even use straws. And what I like about straws is that as a teacher I can cut them into different lengths. With these counting sticks or using toothpicks, everything's, or popsicle sticks even, everything's going to be the same size. So if I'm trying to get a triangle that's not an equilateral triangle, having different sides, I guess you could say, is going to be beneficial. And they could either just lay these on their desk, or we could use marshmallows or Play-Doh or whatever it is that we want to see. But then they can see that this is a triangle. It's a three-sided figure. So we're asking students to create a three-sided figure, and they could create non-equilateral triangles by using cut-up straws. Okay? So that's the create part. With 2D shapes, the students are also asked to classify and sort polygons. So we need to make sure as a teacher that we're helping the students understand what a polygon is. So these are just some quick definitions that we would use to help clarify some terminology we're going to use with students. A polygon is any shape that is flat, it's closed, and it has straight sides. Within these polygons, the students need to be exposed to regular and irregular shapes. So regular are two-dimensional shapes that all the sides and the angles have the same length, and irregular, all of the sides are not the same length. So in second grade, they learn all shapes that are 12 sides or less that are polygons. So this is a really brief chart that just kind of shows you all the shapes that they're going to need to know: triangle, quadrilaterals, pentagon, hexagon, heptagon, octagon, nonagon, decagon, dodecagon, and an entagon if we were going even further. They do still need to know 11. We're using the term 11gon to help them with that. It's just the number 11 with G-O-N behind it. Our examples for a triangle is a regular triangle. All the sides are the same length. But our quadrilateral is not a regular example. So this kind of gives you an idea of an irregular quadrilateral, a regular triangle. And so the students can look at different examples, but they need to be able to classify them, meaning I need to be able to name this. I know this is a pentagon because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices where the sides come together and make a point. That's a vertex, and the pentagon has 5 vertices, and we want the students to use the terminology of sides and vertex. Along with these shapes, students also need to know specific quadrilaterals. So we have our quadrilateral where it has all 4 sides. Students also need to be able to identify a trapezoid, a rectangle, a square, a rhombus, and a parallelogram along with it. So remember that they're classifying, we're naming, and then we're being able to sort them. So we could sort, these have 3 vertices, these have 4 vertices, and they can just make a simple sort activity with that and then be able to classify them or name them based on the attributes. The shapes that have the star next to them, these are all of the shapes that they were introduced to in 1st grade. So we're really kind of adding quite a few shapes to the list, but they're coming to you with a fairly good knowledge of 2-dimensional shapes. Okay. So we want to make sure that they know the number of sides, the number of vertices, and we want to make sure that we're giving them different orientations of those shapes. So continuing with 2-dimensional shapes, the students also need to be able to compose a 2-dimensional shape given properties or attributes. So this is just a set of tangrams that we can give the students, and we can ask them to create a 4-sided figure. So in this part of the TEK, they could just put 2 triangles together and say, I've created a 4-sided figure. From there, we could then talk to them about naming them based on the attributes. So once I know that it's a 4-sided figure, I could call it a quadrilateral, I could call it a rectangle. I also know that this is a square, and it's even a rhombus for the purposes of students' definitions. So we could continue with having them create a figure. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could say create a 6-sided figure using pieces of the tangram, and they could create something like this. It doesn't have to be a specific shape. They could create another 4-sided figure using 2 pieces. We can give them parameters that they have to stay within, but they're going to compose, or I'm going to compose, put together smaller pieces to create larger pieces. Pattern blocks also work the same. I could create a 6-sided figure, and I can create a 5-sided figure with these. So we can definitely see how we can compose using other shapes to create another 2-dimensional shape. From there, the students will also have to decompose the shapes. So I could give them this shape here and tell them to break it apart. And what 2 shapes did they get? I ended up getting a square and a triangle. If we broke this apart, what did we have? We had 3 rhombuses that created that 6-sided figure. We can work with the geoboard again by giving them a geoboard, and we can give them a shape that they have to create, and we can ask them to change that into 2 triangles, and so they could just use rubber bands to show the 2 different triangles that they created, and that would be the decomposing of the 2-dimensional shapes. Not only could we decompose with the pieces that we created when we compose shapes, or by making shapes and then decomposing them on the geoboard, we can also just have the students cut paper. I can give them a square, and I can tell them that they need to cut a triangle out and then describe what 2 shapes they made. So they very simply could just cut a triangle out here, and we could ask them what 2 shapes did they create. Well, I created the triangle, and I created a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a 5-sided figure. That would be a pentagon. If we just ask them the same question, I need you to cut out a triangle, they could have cut right down the center. What 2 shapes did you get when you cut out a triangle? It's kind of hard to see on that white. When we cut that, then we got 2 triangles this time. Okay, so that's the TEKs for 2-dimensional shapes. So now we're going to turn our attention to the 3-dimensional shapes that the students need to know. Again, we're still using the same verbs as far as having to classify and sort. So the students are going to need to know cone, they're going to need to know cylinder, and they need to know the sphere. They need to know rectangular prism. So both of these are rectangular prisms. And then they need to know that a cube is a special rectangular prism. And they also need to know a triangular prism. All of these shapes are the same shapes that they learned in first grade. They still are going to need to be able to talk about the attributes of these shapes. So we're going to want them to be able to tell us about the edge. We're going to need to be able to tell them about the face. We're going to need for them to be able to tell us how many vertices each of the shapes have. For our shapes that have a curved surface, we're going to need to have them talk to us about the bases. And then for the shapes that have the flat surfaces, we can talk to them that the base is what it sits on as well, or what it has as opposite congruent sides. So they need to be able to classify them, name them, and then be able to sort them based on those attributes. Students will be using formal geometric language in second grade. So they're not going to tell us these are the points. They're going to have to use the word vertex. They're going to have to use the word face, and they need to use the word side. The final teak that they're going to be working on with three-dimensional shapes is that the students have to be able to compose three-dimensional solids given properties and attributes. So this time they're going to need to make them. And we can use the same types of manipulatives that we used before as far as using the counting sticks, using the Play-Doh in order for them to create their three-dimensional shape. So we're still composing out of our two-dimensional pieces, so we might be able to create a circle and another circle, and then be able to help them see how we can have the curved surfaces to create a cylinder as well. So we want to make sure, that the students are also composing those three-dimensional solids. If you have any questions about geometry, let us know.